For about the past 2 months, my ADHD-riddled brain has been hyperfixated on Polaroids, so I'm going to give you a guide to buying your first Polaroid camera. There's 3 main types of film: SX70 film, 600 film, and I-type film. Now, the main difference between SX70 and the rest is that SX70 only has an ISO of 100, which means it doesn't have a lot of detail in the highlights or shadows. So I recommend staying away from the SX70 film. The 600 film and the I-type film are actually technically the same film. There is one difference between them though. The 600 film includes a battery, which the older cameras needed because old cameras did not recharge, so they required that battery inside the film pack. And the I-type does not include a battery, so the 600 can work for old and new cameras, but the I-type is only for new cameras. The 600, since it does have that battery inside it, does tend to be a bit more expensive, but the I-type does not include a battery, so it cannot work for old cameras, but it does tend to be a bit cheaper. Now when it comes to what camera you're going to buy nowadays, I personally recommend the One Step 2, just the One Step 2 if you can find it, because it's one of the highest quality of the modern ones, so you can use that really cheap I-type film, which only makes the pictures about $2 a photo compared to the more expensive film. Now, if you are unable to find that camera, the Polaroid now is a pretty good camera. You can find it in stores like Walmart, compared to the Polaroid One Step 2, which you would typically have to buy on eBay. I personally have not tried the Polaroid now, but I have heard that it is a good alternative. But it does tend to be a tiny bit more expensive in exchange for its accessibility in stores. But it does also use I-type film, like the One Step 2, so it is still a bit cheaper. Now, I personally am not very versed when it comes to the vintage cameras, but when it comes to the vintage cameras, you want to stick to the 600 series so that you can take advantage of that 600 film. The 600 film it can work in the vintage cameras because it has a battery included in the film. But unfortunately, the SX film that some of the vintage cameras use can't capture as much detail, so I recommend avoiding that if you can. I also forgot to mention that there's miniature film for the Polaroid Go. I personally do not recommend the Polaroid Go because the pictures you get are smaller, which means that if you're trying to scan them, you will not be able to get as high resolution. And also, that camera just isn't as high quality as the full-size cameras.